Hey, welcome back, biology students. I've missed you. Hope you had a good weekend. We're going to start talking about stem cells this week. So we want to define a stem cell as well as classify them. So there's different types of stem cells. So what are stem cells? Stem cells are very special cells. They have the ability to self-renew, which means they can make more stem cells and they can continue to make copies of cells. They're undifferentiated. And what does that mean? It means that they can become any type of cell. When a cell becomes differentiated or specialized, it can only be one type of cell and do one type of job. So these are undifferentiated cells, meaning they can become any type of cell. They can become skin cells, liver cells, eye cells, blood cells, nerve cells. So they can give rise to any tissue in your body, and then the tissues make up your organs. So over time, they become differentiated. They get signals from the cell itself or from external cues that cause them to begin to specialize. When they specialize, they only exhibit certain genes. Remember, every cell in your body carries every gene to make you, but they're not expressing all of those genes all the time. Like my liver cell definitely is not expressing the same genes as my skin cells. So when they become specialized, they receive signals that turn on certain genes in that cell that allow them to become a specific type of tissue, like skin or muscle, nerves or blood. So this is an example, a stem cell that can become all kinds of different cells. So we've already mentioned a few of those. Epithelial cells are skin cells. Immune cells, white blood cells, they give us our ability to fight infections. There's certain types of white blood cells, T cells and B cells, that give us our immunity, meaning that they recognize specific types of infections and that they will destroy those certain infections. Sex cells, we call these gametes. Our next chapter is going to talk about gametes, the egg, otherwise known as the ovum, and the sperm. Muscle cells that have a special ability to contract. No other tissue contracts. Fat cells, which give us protection against mechanical injuries, as well as insulation and protects all of our organs. The bone cells that become your bones or maybe cartilage. And of course, red blood cells that supply oxygen to the rest of your body. Nerve cells also are very specialized that they can send signals to other cells. So you can see every one of these cells looks very different. They become specialized to do certain jobs. So there's two types of stem cells. You can refer to embryonic stem cells and adult stem cells. Embryonic stem cells are really created in the lab. So you can artificially fertilize an egg in vitro. So a sperm is fertilized or will be used to fertilize an egg. When they come together, they create what's called a zygote. So that initial cell is a zygote. It begins to go through mitosis. In the first few days, scientists have the ability to extract embryonic stem cells from this initial blastocyst, it's called. So only the first few days is that possible. So these are grown in the lab. Individuals would donate their egg and their sperm, so they have given permission to this research. It is a little bit controversial because, of course, this embryo could grow to be an individual and they didn't have the ability to give consent themselves, right? So they're taken from a cluster of undifferentiated cells, so those cells haven't yet started to express specific genes. The other kind is the adult stem cell, and it's better to call them somatic stem cells now. So remember, somatic means body. The reason for this is that they can be found in children as well as adults. They're not just adult stem cells. When we say adult stem cells, we mean that they've already started to differentiate and become certain types of cells. The job of these cells in our bodies is to replace the worn out cells or diseased cells in tissues and organs. These are called multipotent. Multi is multiple, right? So they can become many different types of cells. So we can see this group of multipotent adult stem cells could become cells that turn into a lung or a pancreas. These stem cells here could become heart, muscle, or blood. These tissues here, they could become neurons or skin. So they're somewhat differentiated. They can only become this type of cells. So these red ones here couldn't become a pancreas or they couldn't become a skin. They can only become muscle, cartilage, or blood cells. So these are often found in bone marrow. That's where all of our blood cells are formed. Liver, kidney, corneas, your eyes, umbilical cords, brain, skin, and muscle. So I have no cartilage in my knee. And so the doctor drilled holes in my femur bone. That's the big thigh bone. Drilled holes in my femur bone to release bone marrow. I have like this golf ball size cartilage missing. So they released stem cells from the bone marrow to fill in that gap, and hopefully they got external cues from the cartilage that was there to start becoming cartilage cells. How cool is that? Super cool, I think. So there's some advantages and disadvantages to embryonic and adult stem cells. Obviously, the big advantage of embryonic stem cells is that they can become any type of cell. They're called pluripotent. So you might think of pluri as plural, right? So there's lots of different options. Adult stem cells are already somewhat specialized, right? So they can only become, like that bone marrow could have become cartilage or bone or muscle, but it couldn't have become liver or skin. So these are called multipotent. Multi is multiple. They can become many, but not all. Embryonic stem cells are a little bit more stable because they haven't undergone as many cell divisions. The more cell divisions our cell has, our DNA begins to break down a little bit over time. That's why we get old and things get worn out. So the adult stem cells are less stable. They can't renew as many times as an embryonic stem cell. Embryonic stem cells, super easy to obtain since you're making them in the lab. And adult stem cells are a little bit more invasive, right? They had to drill into my femur bone, and then I had to have like 6 weeks of recovery where my leg was attached to a machine that caused it to bend and open super slow like a sloth to try to create that smooth surface. So definitely not as easy to recover from. Embryonic stem cells, depending on the DNA, right? Our body recognizes cells that belong to us. And since the embryonic stem cells haven't entirely specialized, we may not recognize those stem cells. With adult stem cells, you can get close matches, right? Close family members will have similar markers on their cells. We've talked about marker proteins, for example. And so you can get a close match that your body won't reject. So this totipotent, pluripotent, so potency, think of that as potential. They have the potential to become a certain number of cells, right? So totipotent, think of toti as total. Total is all. So totipotent stem cells can become all types of cells, right? So these are the ones that you're going to find in that initial fertilized egg, that zygote. Also, the first few divisions of the embryo, like I said, the first few days, you're able to capture these totipotent stem cells. After that, they've begun to find their line, right? So maybe we have 4 different lines of cells, and they can only become that type of cell. So they can grow into over 200 different types of cells. And this is the ones that are found in that 3 to 5 day range. So we really got to capture them early if we want the most options for our cell types. So they can further be classified according to the lines of tissue that they're going to become. So here is the 3 examples. So here we have our embryonic stem cells, and we said that there's 3 lines, so they can become a mesoderm. Meso is referring to middle. Endoderm, endo is inner, and ectoderm, which is outside. So, so think of this newly formed body, right? It's going to have an exterior. It's going to have an interior tube, and then it's going to have the stuff that fills the middle. So if you think about your own body, you can kind of picture this. The skin is on our outside, right? So that's ectoderm. Inside, we have our organs like the pancreas and the lung. And in between there, what's the layer in between? A lot of muscle tissue, right? So here you have muscle, skeletal, blood cells, smooth muscle. So you can kind of picture where these are forming, the outside, the inside, and the middle of the body. Okay, so these initial pluripotent stem cells can only become, if it's a mesoderm cell, one of these types of cells. If it's an endoderm cell, only one of these types. You get it? So they're somewhat differentiated and they can only become certain types of cells. We begin to specialize a little bit more the older the cells get. So the multipotent can become many types of cells, but not all types of cells. They have the same basic features, meaning they're somewhat undifferentiated and that they can self-renew, right? So these cells can self-renew and differentiate into more specialized cells, like a specific type of white blood cells. You have 5 different types of white blood cells. You have red blood cells, you have platelets. It can become any one of those cells, but it's not going to become a nerve cell. So they have the ability to differentiate only into that family, right? So many types of blood cells exist. There's many types of muscle cells. You have smooth muscle that makes up like stomachs, organs. You have skeletal muscle, which makes up your moving body parts. And you have your cardiac muscle that is in your heart, right? So stem cells found in the brain can only become cells of the brain. Neural cells, which are your nerve cells sending signals, and glial cells. These are supportive cells of the brain. And then you have unipotent. Hopefully you recognize uni as one, like a unicycle only has one wheel. So they can only differentiate into one type of cell. So these cells are also able to self-renew. They can regenerate over and over again, but they're only going to become one type of cell. So these are super good for treating diseases and injuries. So this is common for skin grafts, like a burn victim. They can extract your very own cells and create skin grafts in the lab, petri dishes, and they create patches that they're able to put on your skin. So you are not going to reject that, right? Because that's your own type of cells. One of the super cool things I think that they're working on is 3D printing. They can 3D print skin cells using your stem cells and like paint it right on you. That is the most amazing thing to me. So these are super valuable when treating diseases and injuries. This is an example of the multipotent and the unipotent cells. So these are committed to becoming a certain type of cells, right? The pluripotent and the totipotent are not yet committed. They haven't chosen a line, for example. So this is hematopoiesis, actually, the formation of blood cells. So you can see you have 2 different types of progenitor cells. So these are multipotent stem cells. They can become many type of cells, but not all cells. So these myeloids, these are found in your marrow, your bone marrow, and they can make erythrocytes, which are red blood cells, many types of white blood cells. Each of these has a different job, like basophils release histamine. So they're very obvious during times of inflammation. Neutrophils, those are your white blood cells that attack most foreign invaders. Eosinophils, more related to parasites and macroscopic organisms. Monocytes, these are phagocytes that engulf and they gobble up foreign bodies. This megakaryocyte is giving rise to platelets. So this is karyokernel, remember that? So that's referring to the nucleus. So in the last week, I think you had questions like, what if a cell went through mitosis many times but not cytokinesis? Well, you'd get a megakaryocyte. You'd get a cell with many nuclei. So fragments of this cell break off and they become the platelets. Platelets are what we use to fight or to clot our blood when we have an injury. And then over here, these lymphoid progenitors, these mature in the lymph system, um, lymph organs, and the lymph itself. So you have natural killer cells, and these fight like viruses and cancer cells. You have these small lymphocytes that are T cells and B cells. B cells, they create antibodies. So you've heard, right? We're all making antibodies after we get the vaccine for COVID. And then the T lymphocyte is more like tissue-related infections, cells that are already infected with viruses or cancer, and they try to destroy them. So that's just one example. Here's multipotent. They can become many, but not all. Stem cells are super important to us in research. Why is that? Because we can study the effects of different techniques or different medicines in cells that are not in a living organism, right? So we'd rather find out the effect of different treatments in a cell before we actually put them in our body, for example. They also allow us to study how disease comes to be in the first place. So if we can study the growth of these cells, we can see where in a life cycle, perhaps, certain diseases might appear and what kind of environmental factors might cause them to appear. So they allow us to study how organisms grow and develop over time. They can be used to replace diseased or damaged cells. So like my cartilage, they are trying to create new cartilage. We can test different substances, drugs, different chemicals on stem cells rather than on living individuals. And we can get a better understanding of the genetic machinery, like turning genes on and off and how they become the cell type that they become. So they're super useful in medicine. You can see all kinds of examples. I love this, spraying stem cells right on the burn site to grow new skin, right? One of my good friends when I was in kindergarten, she had a fireworks accident and her entire leg was burnt, and they had to do skin grafts from her bum and her other thigh. So it was very invasive. Not only do you have your one injury, but you're creating a second injury to heal the first. With stem cells, you don't need to take those grafts from other parts of your body. So that's super helpful and helps the healing process. You can see lots of different things we might use stem cells for. Blindness, I have heard of some techniques that they're using where they inject stem cells right into the eye to create new tissue. You've bone marrow transplants for people who have maybe leukemia, osteoarthritis, or rheumatoid arthritis. That's the one that like really destroys your joints and your fingers get all kinds of wacky looking. Any kind of wound healing, myocardial infarction. This is referring to the muscle of the heart. Muscular dystrophy you might have heard of. ALS, I think you've heard of that, right? Lou Gehrig's disease and that whole ice bucket challenge. So lots of cool things they can do with stem cells to help us in the medicine world. So stem cells are super cool. They have lots of good uses. Remember, there's two types, adult and embryonic. And adult does not necessarily mean that you're over the age of 18, right? Kids have them and even babies have them. And then be familiar with the whole concept of potency, potential to become. Totipotent, total, becomes anything. Pluripotent becomes most everything. Multipotent becomes many, and unipotent only becomes one. So that's the stem cells. Thanks for watching.